let me just place this fairly firmly. If you're going in to do an audit, and it's a general audit, not just specific about this, but you already know that the check and test pilot's out, and by default the cascade effect that they're all out. Sorry, then
they're not all out because it depends on. There are 3 check pilots, and it depends on the aircraft. Chair, I'm sorry, it doesn't necessarily cascade that way.
But everyone checked on that particular type by that pilot are out, and we now know that 4, 5, 6, and 7 are out. Would you have not expected that audit would have turned that up at some time in the 2-day? Wouldn't that be one of the first focuses? You know there's a weakness to follow.
Well, what we found was, as you mentioned earlier, we found that the check captain or check pilot wasn't current.
Yes.
And then we found 4 of his colleagues, including one of the other check pilots, wasn't current.
Yes.
And then we ran out of time, and we said, we'll be coming back to have another...
How many pilots have we got in this whole cohort?
They had 9.
9 pilots.
We've got 9. So by the end of the 2 days, you've run out of time, but you know 5 are dusted, right?
We had 5, and we asked the organisation to check the remaining 4, which took them about 3 or 4 days, and then they advised us, I think it was on the 12th, they advised us that they weren't current as well, or at least out of the remaining, they weren't current as well, so they then decided to cease their own operations.
They weren't current because, number one, well, they weren't current.
It wasn't just number one, they also didn't have their OPCs within the last 12 months.
All right, just before I return to Senator, so now we've got 12 pilots.
No, 9 pilots.
9? Sorry.
8 out of 9.
8 out of 9 are not current, for one reason or another.
Yes.
All right.
That's correct.
Now, you went on to use your discretionary power to permit one of the pilots to then fly.
I did, and that was after multiple representations, but I did that on the 21st because I could see where this was going, and I felt that that the interests and that the interests of aviation safety would be well served by having someone available to conduct these flights over Christmas. The person that I chose was the least egregiously out of date, and I knew that he would be able to go there and check a couple of other pilots, for which I received a thank you email immediately from the CEO of the company saying it's the best Christmas present I've had.
Sure.
Because we made the decision, and that was a risk-based decision. If that had gone wrong, that's on our head.
Sure.
Very fundamental decision.
Well, but I think throughout this entire episode, there are a number of competing factors. One of them is air safety, and I realise that's your bailiwick.
Pretty significant factor.
Okay. There's another one which is the safety of the people that might need retrieval.
Correct.
And I know that you are aware of at least one email where there was a pleading to let these guys back up in the air. It was because you were in the email trail.
That was the one that was forwarded onto us by the company.
It might have been, yes, that's correct.
Which was related, I think it was related to that, it occurred after that, after we found out about the one that they had turned down.
Sure.
As I've said with respect, Senator, there are almost 10 companies on the East Coast that do this. They're not the only ones. We can give you the names of them if you wish. They're not the only ones, which is the first point. And second point, the other element that plays into this company, which I think is worth mentioning, is when we turned up to do the Dominic James flight on the 8th of December, so we'd sorted this out and we're doing it as a private flight. I understand all of the discussion we've had. The aircraft's not serviceable. Now, we could have just walked then and said, call us when you're ready. But no, we waited all day until they got the aircraft serviceable so we can conduct the check and get this thing going. But then we've got a lead indicator on their maintenance. So we've gone back in now to look at their maintenance, and we're not particularly thrilled with what we're finding as well. So
I might clarify that point. It was pilot number 1, and when we're having a discussion and a briefing of Dominic of how the events were going to play out, he made general conversation, the fuel gauge is unserviceable, but I haven't written it up because the engineer said they've got to drain the fuel to fix it. I said, well, you don't have a choice, you have to write it up. And I said, it's probably it's called an MEL item, which means there is a period you can keep it unserviceable, so long as you document it and you follow a set procedure in the manual of how you establish fuel quantity in flight. And he ummed and ahed, and then he wrote it up. Okay, fair enough. Tick that in a bit of education. And he's fully aware of this anyway. It's not something that's new to him. And about an hour later, after he'd walked out and back to the aircraft a few times, he said, "Oh, I found a defect on the aircraft. I'm going to have to write it up." And it was a broken navigation light lens. We then had to get, there was no spares in the country, and we had to get an engineering order design to fix it. And they had to have a repair scheme carried out on the aircraft. We left between 3:30 and 4 o'clock that afternoon. I believe that defect didn't occur just then, and I suspect that he was aware that when I walked out to the aircraft, it would be pretty obvious, and at that point we'd be saying, "What about this?"
There was a hole in a navigation light. That was the issue.
Yeah,
wasn't
it's
it?
a lens cover that's
Yeah.
an aerodynamic piece, and it had a
Yeah.
hole in it.
So it was a pinhole or something, wasn't
It
it?
wasn't a pinhole; it was a hole you could put your finger in.
Sure.
Now that's,
establishing the facts,
ramifications.
giving you an
Just
opportunity.
bear with us, because we
This is
get,
all-
I've got to tell you,
Ramifications of that.
you should
water
join
and
us
ice.
most weeks, and while we get a steady stream of people in front of us, so they tell us things and we'll put it to you. But
Can, Mr Campbell, sorry, just made a point on the ramifications of that, Senator, for what it's worth.
This is in the leading edge of the wing with electronics, and it's water and ice hazard. So in flight, any water contamination will short out the lighting. So it was a significant issue. It wasn't just cosmetic.
I have a question for us, Mr Elliott, because I want to get my ear in tune with this. It's a legal question. So obviously Mr Carmody has discretions. Now, I'm assuming he couldn't exercise a discretion for me tonight to go out and fly a jet plane when I've never flown a jet plane. So that's an extreme example. At what point, what's the threshold where he would not be able to exercise?
His discretion to permit something that would otherwise not be permitted?
No, I'm just trying to, is there some test that we could apply as we listen to this about how far he can exercise discretion?
I wish there were a magic test. The test is the risks that are presented do not pose and can be mitigated to the point that the risk is not unacceptable in the interest of safety, balancing all the other relevant considerations, which is exactly the process he went through, Mr. Carmody went through, in allowing this one pilot an exemption to do what needed to be done. And as Mr. Carmody said, there was a risk attendant upon that. The irony is not lost that this was a
Well,
medical making.
in that case, 9 days out of time, I mean, that's, you wouldn't, you could
a risk-
argue a
Yeah,
position.
look, Senator, there are two things here, and I think Senator Patrick was on to them, and he's saying that, hang on, a few days out, we're talking about people who are reasonably competent. There was this case that said this delegate who he had not maintained proficiency, conducted all these tests, how unfair it would be to all these people who paid money to have their tests conducted on the good faith assumption that the person who was conducting them was capable of doing it. One of the things the court took into account there was that there were any number of people who in good faith, without any reason to know or believe that the person who was conducting the test had fallen afoul of a condition on his delegation. The delegation was never removed by CASA, so he had the delegation. In fact, he applied for, as part of the process, you have to register an intention to conduct a test. He registered his intention to conduct a test at a time when he was not proficient. CASA systems at the time, and we're going back a few years now, didn't pick up the fact. So there are a lot of reasons why the delegate himself might have assumed, or might not have even recognized, at least at one point, that he was not meeting the requirements of the condition. And all these innocent people were affected. And they said, but after all, it wasn't such a big deal. And look at all these innocent people who would be affected by it.
No,
in
I
this
think-
case, this is a significant difference. In this case, there were no outsiders. They were all within the company. They all knew or ought to have known what their particular proficiencies were. And none of the individuals was told that anything you've done you no longer have, as the individuals in the Royal Queensland Club would have done, case would have done. They would have been said, that instrument rating you were issued, it's no good, because the guy who conducted the test wasn't able to do it. So you're going to lose it. And what the court said was, if you think they shouldn't have it, initiate action to take it away. In this case, it wasn't a question of taking anything away. It was a question of granting an exemption from a requirement with which they didn't comply. And it wasn't a group of any number of innocent people. And these are, balancing it, well, should it matter whether they're innocent or not? The court took that into account. And we took it into account, saying, no, this isn't a group of people who, in good faith, relied on the qualifications of a delegate, a CASA delegate who held his delegation. This was a situation where within a company, everybody involved knew, and frankly, although it would have been embarrassing and probably uncomfortable for the individual pilots, the only person who was disadvantaged by this was the operator.
So
That's right.